Welcome. Good morning. You all are just a sight for sore eyes. You bless my heart and my spirit every morning when we come together. We are in a study in this season, rich study entitled Knowing God by Name. And we anchored the study in Psalm 9, verse 10. Those who know your name will put their trust in you. Those who know your name will put their trust in you. Alan and I were at the beach last week. I love the beach. Alan was finishing up his most recent book. It had to be into the publisher this past Saturday. So he was writing diligently, and I was clapping and cheering and toting coffee. That was my main job. We would get up in the morning, and I would say, tell me exactly what your schedule is, and I'll just be here waiting. He would take a break, and we would take a walk. Do you know who's at the beach this time of year? Nobody. Nobody is at the beach this time of year. And it was cold. And so Alan was working a lot from early morning till late at night. So I walked a lot by myself. And I love to walk on the beach. But it's a little creepy to walk on the beach when there's nobody as far as the eye can see. I know a minute of creepiness with that. I didn't let it stop me. I didn't let my mind wander to what might be. I'm out there alone. But it's a little creepy. But that might be grounded in an experience I had years ago. My sister and I had the opportunity when our kids were little to go to the beach, just the two of us, and we took all our kids. So there were 5 children total, and they ranged in age probably from, 3 to 8. And I don't remember why we were there. It was a vacation, but it was cold, and it was kind of dreary. I don't know why we chose to go. We must have been desperate women. And we went out on the beach, and we're walking on the beach and with the 5 children. And they're, all over the place, and we're walking, and there was no one on the beach when we started the walk, but as we continued the walk, I noted, we also had we had a puppy at the time, our beagle, Reese. And I had little Reese on a leash, and he was, completely untrained at the time. Now, inherent in that statement would be that we did train him at some point, which is not true. He was as he always was, but he was just younger, smaller. So we're walking on the beach, and I did know that there's a leash law. No dogs can be on the beach without a leash. And I looked down the beach, and 300, 400 yards down the beach, there's a family walking towards us, only ones on the beach. Look like an older couple, and maybe their college-age son, and they have a dog, and he's clearly not on a leash. Dog is running wild into the surf and out, and it's a large boxer. And I just had a minute of a thought. I don't feel real comfortable with all these little kids and that dog not on a leash. But I love dogs. I just didn't let it. But we continued to walk. We're walking slowly. We're doing what you would call sauntering. When you have 5 kids and a puppy. But they're walking towards us, and the closer they got, the more I became a little uncomfortable with the fact that dog was not on a leash. I turned to my sister, Catherine, and I said, note, dog not on a leash coming towards us. And she said, oh, and I said, if there's a problem, do we just run into the surf? And she's like, with the 3-year-olds? And I said, well, plus we can see your breath. It's, freezing out there. So we continued to walk. I continued to be very cognizant. At this point, I looked, and just in the edge of the surf were 2 fishermen. They had their poles and those tubes, and they're fishing in the surf. The only other 2 people, I looked behind us, nobody as far as the eye can see, but these 2 gentlemen are in the surf fishing, and this family is walking towards us. And they got closer, and we continued to walk. And when they got probably about 50 yards from us, I began to think, the dog didn't look very well trained, and I just, in my spirit, thought, I'm not comfortable with this. They turned and headed off the beach, and so I said, not a problem. They're leaving. So I kind of slowed down so the children would kind of play around, and we just waited for them to leave the beach. And they went up. There was a walkway, decking walkway onto the beach over the dunes. So they walked up and onto the deck, and they were leaving the beach, and we continued our walk. But I continued to be cognizant of that dog. And I did note that the family went on across the decking and down but the dog turned around. And he was all like all you could see up there, and he turned around and he was looking at us. And I thought, I'm not going to have eye contact with him. Just not going to have eye contact with him. So I was kind of playing with the children, and we're walking along, and I thought, well, surely he's gone by now. A couple minutes went by, and I looked, and I made the fatal mistake was I locked eyes with the dog. I looked, and he came off that deck running at full tilt. And he was running, he was on a mission, and it was clear he was going to eat one of us. And I turned to holler to Catherine, and when I turned, she was gone. Now, rightfully so, in her defense, she had scooped up her 3-year-old, and she was running for all she was worth down the beach in the opposite direction. I mean, she was gone. She was not even within earshot. And there I am with the other 4 kids. And so we've laughed about it since. Thanks, Catherine. And he's coming, and he's growling. He's going to attack. I've got little Reese, and I've got the kids. So I'm backing up, and I'm saying, the kids are just kind of oblivious to it. You know, they're laughing and bouncing around, and I'm saying, back up, back up. And I look over, and I look to see the men. I'm going to need help. And they have dropped their poles, and they are running towards me. And I thought, well, isn't it amazing? They saw the dog coming. And then I realized, no, they're coming because somebody's screaming. And I realized who that was. I was screaming for all I was worth. I was hollering. I was screaming. I don't know what I was screaming, but I mean, you watch on television, somebody will be about to be murdered, and they holler. You could hear me for miles, I'm sure. I was screaming. So they're running towards me, but the dog is going to get to us long before these 2 men do. So I've backed up. I've kind of got the children huddled behind me, and I did have this thought. I will kill this dog. Have you ever felt that way? I mean, for all the dog lovers out there, let me tell you, I love a sweet dog. But I thought, I'm going to do what it takes, and I will kill this dog. So he's running at us, and and the first thing he does is he skids right as he gets to me, and he opens his mouth, and he grabs hold of the puppy. And slides by, trying to, how they do, try to snap a neck. And he's got the puppy. Of course, I'm my warped thinking, I'm like, okay, he's got the puppy. Let's run. I'm still screaming. And I'm just going to grab hold of this dog. About that time, and he is just swinging the puppy around. The 2 men get there, and one man just went right on top of those dogs, and the other grabbed hold of me and the kids, and started shouting instruction: step back, come back, and he said to me, "Get the puppy." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" But when I turned around, the other guy has pulled the boxer like off of his front legs, and by his collar, and he's let go of the puppy. So I go and grab Reese and back away, and thus ensues this amazing. This all happens within seconds. We managed to get away. The children were none the worse for the wear. I was so shaken. I had an adrenaline rush. I don't think I slept for 3 days. Reese, he was, he needed a little bit of TLC. but he recovered. I was very thankful for those lonely fishermen on the beach. The guy, I will say the owner of the dog, the college student, came running about that time. And he said, "Oh, he won't hurt you." I loved those people too much, those kids, to not defend them. Here's what I want us to see today. We have an enemy who seeks to kill, steal, and destroy. Peter said he roams like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. We have battles to fight. John said in chapter 16, verse 33, he quotes Jesus, saying, "These things I have spoken unto you, that in me you will have peace, that in me you will trust. In the world you will have tribulation." I looked that up, it means affliction. You will have affliction, but take courage. I have overcome the world. Here's the good news. Our God is Jehovah Nissi, and he's our defender. He is in the midst of every battle. He is the Lord, our banner, the Lord, our defender. He is our defense, our salvation, our rock, our fortress, our shield, our deliverer. Today we'll be in the book of Exodus again, where God reveals himself as Jehovah Nissi, the Lord who is our banner. I want to give a little background information before we dive into the actual chapter that we're going to read. If we start at Exodus 2, chapter 2, God's people are enslaved in Egypt, and they cry out to God in their misery as slaves. And in chapter 3, the very next chapter, God calls Moses out of the burning bush and said, "I want to send you to Pharaoh, and I want to deliver my people." And so Moses goes. And for the next 8 chapters, God does miraculous signs and wonders before the children of Israel and before Pharaoh, waiting for Pharaoh to let God's people go. And for those 8 chapters, Pharaoh is unrelenting and will not let the people go. And then we come to chapter 12, and the last sign and wonder God has done in their midst is he's sent a number of plagues on the Egyptians. And in chapter 12, we see the last of the plagues, which is the death of the firstborn of every Egyptian. And it's the wonderful story of the Passover, and the children of Israel are saved as the angel of death passes over. But there's great wailing and mourning in Egypt at this death of the firstborn. And Pharaoh relents and lets the children of Israel go. And they're set free. And as they're leaving, in their joy, the word says they plunder the Egyptians. They even go to the Egyptians and say, "Can I have all your jewelry?" And they say, "Sure." And it says they leave rich as they leave Egypt. And in chapter 12, they celebrate the Exodus. Very short-lived. Because shortly thereafter, they look behind them, and Pharaoh has changed his mind. And he's bearing down on them with the Egyptian army. And so it says the people grumble and complain. And they say to Moses, "Would that we just stayed. Being a slave wasn't so bad. You've brought us here to die." And they complain. And we see the marvelous miracle. Moses holds up the rod, which will be for us today. We'll learn a banner. And the sea parts. And then there's an enormous celebration in chapter 15. Miriam, Moses' sister, sings, and they celebrate the horse and rider thrown into the sea, and the Exodus and God's salvation by opening the Red Sea, and God's amazing provision. That's in chapter 15. In chapter 16, we find the children of Israel grumbling and complaining. They don't have food. And they complain to Moses again, would that we'd stayed in Egypt. And God provides manna, and God provides quail. And the children are once again satisfied and happy, and they celebrate. And in the next chapter, chapter 17, they're grumbling and complaining again because they have no water. That's where we're going to pick up. God tells Moses to strike a rock, and he provides water from the rock. Amazing, miraculous provision. Again, do you see the theme? As long as the focus of the people of God is on God and his magnificence, there's great joy. There's faith, and there's trust, and there's well-being. But when the focus becomes the battles and the lack and the problems, when those become magnified, there's despair. And it's over and over and over again. I've not come to say, well, and so God takes care of that because his desire is that we have an easy life. That is not our gospel. Our gospel is not a gospel of an easy life. Our gospel is a gospel of a big God who made every provision, in whom there is no lack. I loved Ashley's teaching last week on Elohim. He's a big God. He's the creator of the ends of the earth. He has all power and authority. We said in previous weeks, he's El Shaddai, Almighty God. He's omnipotent. He's El Elyon. He's sovereign. He's in charge. He's over all. And today we'll see how he's Jehovah Nissi, the Lord my banner. He's our defender, our rock, our fortress, our shield, our deliverer, our strength, our refuge, our high tower, a very present help in time of trouble. Moses, when he's instructing the people in Deuteronomy 1, he says, the Lord your God who goes before you will himself fight for you. And again, for the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you the victory. He loves us too much to leave us in our battles. I saw a wonderful visual of this that I wanted to share with you. It's from a movie called The Bear, just a short clip, picture of how God fights our battles for us. or he has to turn and fight with 0% chance of winning. And yet, there's a mommy or a daddy bear. Right? I love this clip because the papa bear or mama bear doesn't even have to lift a finger in the battle. All that big bear does is roar, and the enemy flees. We're in the battle. God could take us out of the battle, and there are times when God does take us out of the battle. There's no telling what we avoid because God saves us from it before we ever encounter it. And we're going to talk about that another time. But today we're going to talk about those times where God leaves us in the battle. But he declares this over us. Stand and watch, for the battle belongs to the Lord. Such is the power and the might of our God. He lets us think, as the baby bear did, that we're actually doing something. Right? He'll win the battle for us and let us take the credit. We're in Exodus 17, verse 8. I'm going to be reading out of the New King James Version. Exodus 17, verse 8. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel. So in verse 6, we're in verse 8. In verse 6, they get water from the rock. Moses has struck the rock with the rod of God, and they got water. So as soon as these weary, thirsty people get water, there's an enemy on them. Do you ever feel that way? You can't climb out of one battle and you're faced with another? I think that's when the enemy sees an opportune time. Now Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. He fights with the Amalekites come against the Israelites at Rephidim. These are the Amalekites. They will become for Israel a relentless enemy. A relentless enemy. Moses said to Israel in Deuteronomy 25, remember what the Amalekites did to you as you were coming out of Egypt, when you were tired and weary, how they attacked all the stragglers at the rear. The Amalekites become a constant enemy and a source of angst and misery for the people of God. Some scholars believe that the Amalekites are a picture of our battle with the flesh. They would say that's what we're to see here. The Amalekites are a picture of our battle with the flesh. And they give two reasons for that. One is the Amalekites are the first army, the first enemy, and the first battle that Israel has to fight. This is the first battle that they fight. So, scholars would say, as the flesh is often the first enemy that we battle, the Amalekites are the first enemy of the people of God. And two, the Amalekites are a constant threat. They're constantly battling the Amalekites, as we often are constantly warring with our flesh. Paul lists some of the deeds of the flesh in Galatians 5: immorality, idolatry, strife, jealousy, enmity, envy, drunkenness. And maybe, I believe, in part, that is part of the holistic battle that we fight. Yes, the Amalekites are a symbol of our battle with the flesh, but I think it's bigger than that. I agree with other scholars who have given a broader definition. I love this definition. The Amalekites symbolize this: any force of evil that seeks to keep you from achieving the purposes of God. Any source of evil that seeks to keep you from achieving the purpose of God. This is not the only battle that the children of Israel will have with the Amalekites. These battles will continue from generation to generation. Let me give you a little side point. In 1 Samuel 15, God has called up Samuel as king, And God speaks to Saul. He's called up Saul as king in 1 Samuel. And God says to Saul, I want you to go and wage war against the Amalekites. And I want you to wipe them out. Well, I don't want a single Amalekite left alive. As a matter of fact, I want you to kill all of their livestock. The sheep, the donkeys, the goats, the oxen. Leave none, the lambs, leave none of them alive. It's a picture. There are people that read that. It's a stumbling block for them. They said, that's a mean God. We have to understand it's a picture of God's total hatred of sin and evil and how he wants it routed out completely. Victory complete over sin and evil. Saul does go and wages war against the Amalekites, but he just can't do it. And he keeps some of them alive as trophies. We know that he kept the king, Agag, the king of the Amalekites, he let live. And it says also their livestock just looked so good that he kept many of the healthier livestock. So God speaks to the prophet Samuel and says, Saul has not obeyed me, and I'm going to take the kingship from him, and I want you to go tell him. And so the prophet Samuel goes to Saul to tell him this news. And as Samuel approaches Saul, I think this is so funny. This is just how earthy the Bible is. I love this. This is an aside. This is not part of the story. But Samuel comes to Saul and he says, I've come to give you a word from the Lord. And Saul says, I did what the Lord told me to do. I waged war against the Amalekites. And Saul is so excited about himself. I love this. Samuel says this, then what is that bleating of sheep that I hear? What is that mooing of oxen? And Saul says, well, we did keep some of the livestock. And Samuel says, this day, God declares that he's taking the kingship from you. And not too long thereafter, 2 Samuel chapter 1 records the death of King Saul. It's in battle, and Saul is killed by an Amalekite. Verse 9, and Moses said to Joshua, chapter 17 of Exodus, verse 9, and Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out and fight with Amalek, fight with the Amalekites. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Moses is saying, Joshua, you gather an army, and I'm going to go up on the hill, and I'm going to take the rod of God, and I'm going to extend it over the battle. Now Joshua would have seen this before. Not long before, he would have seen this very thing. And when Moses lifted that rod, the Red Sea parted. And Moses said, I'm going to do it again over you as you fight. Gather an army. You'll have but to look up and see the salvation of the Lord. And Joshua is encouraged. Verse 10. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek, the Amalekites. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was when Moses held up his hand that Israel prevailed. And when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and one on the other. And his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. It's a wonderful account. This is what I believe God is saying in this account. I think God is shouting, enough! Enough with the trusting and then the doubting and then the trusting and then the doubting and then the celebrating and then the doubting and then the celebrating and then the despair. God said, I want to show you something. I want to show you something. If I were to give a title to this, I would say, this talk, God's got this. God's got this. It's as if God is saying to his beloved, I want you to see, my people, with absolute clarity, I am the God who saves you. I am the God who defends you. I am the God who is sovereign over every battle. I'm Almighty God, and I want to make it unmistakable. So when Moses holds up his hand, Joshua's winning. When the banner is raised. When it comes down, Joshua's losing, and the Amalekites prevail. This goes on. As Moses grows weary, he puts his hands down, the Amalekites prevail. And this goes on until Aaron and Hur bring a rock up and say, sit down, Moses, and he sits down on the rock, and then they hold his arms up, and Joshua prevails. Joshua wins. Some commentaries say that Aaron and Hur and Moses are praying on the mountain. It's a picture of intercession, and we do see that Aaron and Hur do intercede, don't they? On behalf of Moses. They intervene and help Moses. And I believe there is praying going on. Some scholars would say that they're worshiping, that Moses' raised arms are a picture of worship. They're both beautiful images and may very well both be true. But it's a profound picture of Aaron and Hur assisting Moses and God giving the children of Israel victory over their enemy. God wants it unmistakable. It is I who gives you the victory. Scripture is replete with this image. As I started studying this, I said, well, we could talk about this for weeks. Over and over and over and over again, God declares his victory. God declares his power over the enemy. Exodus 14, the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. 2 Chronicles 20, verse 17, you will not need to fight in this battle. Stand firm, hold your position, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. 2 Chronicles 32, 8, with him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. Jeremiah 1:19, they will fight against you, but they shall not prevail against you, for I am with you, declares the Lord, to deliver you. Nehemiah 4:20, our God will fight for us. Psalm 37, verses 39 and 40, David says this, salvation of the righteous is from the Lord. He is their strength in the time of trouble. And the Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust in him. In Psalm 91, verse 14 and 15, the psalmist says, because he has set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. God says, I will set him on high because he has known my name. He shall call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and I will honor him. Over and over, God declares this. And then we come to the last verses of chapter 17, starting at verse 14. So Joshua has defeated the Amalekites. And in verse 14, then the Lord said to Moses, write this down for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called its name, the Lord is my banner. For he said, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Moses says, write this down. I don't want anyone to forget this. Write this down as a memorial. I don't want anybody to forget. And then he says, particularly Joshua. Make sure that you read this to Joshua. because there are battles ahead. And I want you to remember that I'm with you in the battle, and the victory belongs to me. There will be battles to fight, even in the promised land. The promised land will become, for the children of Israel, a battleground. They will fight to take ground in the promised land. So Moses built an altar and he called it, "The Lord is my banner." Now, banner in ancient times was a standard or an emblem, a symbol that was put on top of a pole, and it was carried at the front of an army. It was often made of metal so that it would have a reflective nature to it, so it could catch the light of the sun, be seen from far away. It was a rallying point for the army in a time of war, so the old soldiers could look to it. They could see it above the battlefield, and they could look to it, no matter how harsh or chaotic the fighting. As long as it was lifted high, they had courage, confidence in the battle. Moses lifted the rod of God over Joshua, over the battle, as a banner. Isaiah gives a poignant image of this. He says, when the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will raise up a standard against him. I hope you can hear the whisper of the gospel in this whole idea of a banner. In Numbers 21, snakes come in and bite the children of Israel, and they're dying. If you're bitten by a snake, you die. And so Moses brings this to the Lord, and God says, put an emblem of a snake on top of a pole, and when the people look at it, they'll be saved. And it's exactly what happens. When anyone's bitten, when anyone deals with that enemy, they have but to look at the banner and they're saved. That's in Numbers. And then in John, we hear this: Christ, as I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all men to myself. And John said, just as Moses lifted up the snake in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him will have life. The banner. We have an enemy, and we have battles to fight. But we have a God who has power over all the power of the enemy. He is more powerful than the enemy. There's nothing that we're going to face. No battle that we face is too much for our God. We need just pray a prayer like this. God, I want to turn this battle over to you. I know that you are fighting my battles. I am not alone. I am never alone. You've made a promise that you are with me always. I believe in your deliverance. I believe you are a strong tower. I believe you are a fortress. You're my defender, my very present help.